I don't want to disappoint you, so let me quickly run through a couple of points on beneficial ownership because I think it's got some relevance right now for public procurement, and whether you're a supplier or you're a public procurement practitioner, I think this is important to be aware of. So CIPC, that's that organization, that system where you register businesses. From the 1st of April, almost a year ago, they had a beneficial ownership declaration option. The company's regulations were amended 24th of May last year. And as of the 15th of April this year, companies have to declare beneficial ownership. And it's gone right to the point now that the Central Suplier Database no longer allows suppliers to update ownership information on CSD. It is imported directly from CIPC's database. So that's the big change for procurement, is to be aware that CSD no longer allows a supplier to go in and in the supplier database, in the Central Supplier Database, to update their ownership information in that database. It was all pulled in from the CIPC system. Ingrid, you got a comment?
Who verifies that ownership, Shaun?
Okay.
If it's a voluntary upload? In terms of a listed entity, your shareholding's changing on a daily basis. So who verifies it?
Let's discuss that. Good question. Now, one of the things is why the focus on beneficial ownership, and why is this difference, and why is there this focus? And this is an example, and I think there are other examples. So in this particular one, there's 3 shareholders here: Jane Smith, Smith Holdings, and John Smith. Jane and John both own 30% each, and Smith Holdings owns 40%. But if you were to look at the Smith Holdings shareholding, Jenny Smith and John Smith own that particular company. So the beneficial ownership then of John Smith in this example is he doesn't just own 30%, he actually has ownership of 50%, because this 50% is 50% of that 40%, which is 20. So that 20% here plus the 30% is what John Smith in this particular example actually owns. So that's one of the reasons why there is this focus on beneficial ownership, because companies get very creative in putting together different trusts and companies and various structures to try and influence the way in which a company looks from an ownership perspective. And they do these things creatively. And so the focus on beneficial ownership is to really try and resolve that. So now let's answer some of the questions then that are being asked on this point. So the first thing is, when a supplier then goes into CIPC, they are doing a formal declaration on the CIP system in terms of their ownership. They formally declare who owns what. Now, the question around listed companies, for example, their ownership changes on a daily basis. Beneficial ownership kicks in for anyone who owns more than 5% of a business. There are different types of companies that are recognized, and I forget now the term. I think there's impacted and non-impacted companies. One of those would be those such as listed companies are treated differently to an ordinary company that might be along the lines of this John Smith one that I've just mentioned, the Smith Limited company that I've just mentioned here. So this is ordinary PTY limiteds would go in, as well as non-profit companies, for example, would go in, and they would start off the process by formally declaring. Remember, they're declaring now in the context of an updated, amended Companies Act regulations for the Companies Act. And when they go in, they then start to capture the ownership information. And they're supposed to put in all the natural persons information in here, as well as the ID and passport information, which is, and I've personally checked this, which is validated against Home Affairs database. When I put in my ID number, it went to Home Affairs and picked up my name and surname as registered with Home Affairs. When I put in the issue date, it was very, very specific, and I had to put in exactly the issue date that exists on my ID book in order for this to go through. So there's that level of control that exists there. They then go in, they put their email, personal income tax is also there as well, and the ownership percentage. And then there's quite a detailed listing of the options under the interest types that exist, and then the demographics. Now, I don't know if they're picking up demographics from the Home Affairs database, but certainly demographics is what is included as well in this declaration. I don't know if demographics is included, but certainly is checked, but certainly it is included and updated in the CIPC database. Let me just quickly check. There's some comments that are being raised. The next thing that then happens after that is, once you've gone through the whole process, you've got to upload documents supporting the declaration, including IDs and a whole range of share registers and other documents like that. There's also a requirement to have a document that confirms that you are the person who's been approved by the company to put this information in. And once that's been updated, it then gets checked, and you then receive a certificate. And so there's a formal certificate that is then issued by CIPC on the beneficial ownership for that particular company. Now, I'm just sharing one here. I'm not going to give you all the details, but this is one that was done recently. And right at the end of the certificate then is the listing of all the shareholders on the certificate. Now, this does not give demographics, but it does give the shareholding. So what are the implications of this? And I'll just quickly share this with you and just some thoughts, and then we'll wrap up for the day. If there's other points, we can certainly get into it. Here are my thoughts. The one is, ownership is such an important part of preferential procurement and our preferential procurement policies. Is there not a reason to possibly look at your preferential procurement policies and start to emphasize beneficial ownership rather than just ownership? I think there would be some value in looking at that. For another reason, shortly, I wouldn't do it right now, but I think it's something you want to start to consider. Number one. Number two is some of the policies that we're aware of actually reference the CSD reports on ownership and the demographics of that ownership, whether it's Black women, whether it's disabled, whether it's military veterans. I was unable to get the CSD report this week, and I tried again this morning because of a technical issue that is being experienced by CSD. Now, it might just be my company. I don't know, but I suspect that because CSD no longer allows changes to the ownership in CSD and it's pulled in entirely from CIPC, that I suspect that there might be some technical issues that they're experiencing with that now. So be aware of that. And if you are looking at CSD reports potentially as a way to validate ownership claims for preferential procurement, just be aware that there might be some issues as far as that's concerned. However, I think that when the technical issues are resolved, it is going to be a far better place to rely on ownership information than we had before. There was no, when you went into CSD and you updated information in CSD, ownership information in CSD, they didn't have the level of rigor that we see now in CIPC. And so I think it might be much easier to rely on CSD going forward once some of the technical issues are resolved. And I think the other one then is it may be a good point for, because you need to get the proof. It may be a good point to start requesting those beneficial ownership certificates that are issued by CIPC as some level of proof on what the ownership could be, as opposed to relying on the old certificates that were issued previously. Some thoughts, Ingrid. You've got a question or a comment.
Yeah, Shaun. You know what? This is in not very complicated cases, but I go back to the case of a large listed entity who set up beneficial trusts for ownership, etc. That is only verified by a SANIS-approved procurement verification agency. There's no way that you can upload that level of information. It's taken as a snapshot on a certain day, looking at treasury shares, this, that. There's no way that that can be done here, and anyone can have any level of comfort that the information uploading is being accurate. So that's what my issue is.
And what just to explain the nature of the companies that you're concerned about?
Any of the big entities that are trading shares and have share schemes and trusts and employee ownership schemes, those are all verified according to the formulas that are approved in the codes, okay? And the mechanism.
You're talking about the BBBE codes. Yeah.
Yes, and on a snapshot on a certain day, you get a copy of treasury shares. So it's extremely complicated. So they've made an agreement that it's a snapshot on a certain day, and that gets renewed every year. So that is why I'm querying why this unbundling of Act 53 is being allowed, because that's a mechanism to actually evaluate what that ownership is. And it's not a matter of uploading a few share certificates onto the CIPS database.
Interesting point, and I certainly something we could maybe look at in the future. I think it's, from what I could see, is they do treat companies such as those with share schemes and listed companies differently to the example that I've just given now. They are treated differently on CIPC. I've been part of some of the discussions that have happened by FIC, DTIC, and others, and I think a lot of those issues have been considered. So I'd be surprised if something that the points you're making now have not been considered. Let's see, Michael, your thoughts.
Yeah, sorry, I just have two points. One is how do you classify a pension fund or the public investment corporation where they own a large chunk of shares in a listed company? Who is the owner of that? Or the Development Bank of South Africa that is a shareholder in a non-listed company? But
You
ownership,
mean from a demographic perspective, you're asking?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But, I'll give you a typical example. Take an incorporated company, which is one that is frequently used by certain categories of professional people. The shareholders and the directors are two completely different entities.
Yeah.
So you could have the ownership being, in theory, entirely of disabled people, and the directors are completely different when you switch the lights on. So I don't understand. Focusing on ownership is important, but for me, what is more important is actually focusing on management, who actually runs the entity, because management is the gateway to ownership, not the other way around.
Which is the whole rationale for the focus on triple BEE or broad-based triple BEE. Broad-based Black Economic Empowerment is it's more than ownership; it's also management and a whole range of other points. Absolutely. And the reason why many organizations are still using triple B scorecards as the basis for allocating preference points. Good points. Good points. Thank you. It seems like we might have to unpack this a little bit further. And we may need to get somebody from CIPC and DTIC to also come through and just help us with this as well. The purpose of this was to raise the point and just make especially the public procurement people online aware that there is a change on CSD going forward, and that you want to please just monitor this carefully, particularly if you're using ownership as a basis for allocating preference points. I saw a hand go up. I don't know if it was just quickly testing. All right, cool. There we are. Karabo. Hi, Karabo. You can unmute.
Hi, Shaun. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted to weigh in on this listed companies and investment funds question. And you are correct that there's a different treatment for private companies or non-listed companies in the companies in comparison to listed companies. And so for sort of your average private company, they are required to submit beneficial ownership data. So who are the warm bodies and natural persons, but because of the complexity, which was articulated by a few people here, around the difficulty, the rapidly changing ownership of complex or listed companies, the concept of beneficial interest is used as what they're required to disclose. And so that would factor in things such as it doesn't necessarily have to be a natural person. It would factor in other sort of ownership or control arrangements within that particular entity, but in recognition of that complexity. And to some extent, if you look at other jurisdictions, including London, for example, they don't require listed companies or those on the London Stock Exchange to disclose their beneficial ownership or interest, whereas I think South Africa has taken a step further to say, at least let's get beneficial interest, which can begin to point us towards who's exercising some degree of control or what the management structure is, and so forth. So I think there has already been contemplated how to treat these more complex scenarios in the legislation, and then in addition, in how the reporting is happening. And there's a really interesting developing system where the CIPC is working with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and Straight and others to allow for the exchange of data for the very purpose of who's going to be able to use that data for a variety of purposes. But I think it's fascinating how this could potentially be used for procurement purposes. So yeah, just want to.
Thanks, Carl. But maybe you can help me. What are the different terms of the companies that that are used in CIPC?
So there's
impacted or implicated or something. What is the
affected companies?
Affected companies, yeah.
Which has replaced the prior regulated companies terminology.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and I think the whole movement is that many preferential procurement policies are focusing again on ownership and for preferential procurement. And I think this is going to increase with Chapter 4 in the new Public Procurement Bill. And so I think it's something that we need to start to get a lot more familiar with and closer to as procurement practitioners in the space. Thank you. There we are. Wonderful. Any other points? Next week, we will have a discussion specifically around what does it mean? What does the Public Procurement Bill mean for procurement practitioners? We need to look at the potential scenarios of challenges, of the processes that will be followed. What does it mean for us? For example, I'm already thinking that there's going to be a need to start engaging on regulations. So what are the structures that we're going to be putting together as a procurement community to start engaging and assisting in the development of those regulations? And how we're going to manage that going forward. And so we'll have that discussion next week, and hope to bring in a fairly wide range of people to provide some input and some thoughts on that. I've already started extending some of the invitations, and for those who are still here, I can see some of your names there. I might be sending you invitations to please try and join us. Thank you to everybody for all your inputs. Really fascinating time that we're into. Hello, Komotso.
Thanks, Shaun. Just a quick one. Can you please share the presentation with us, please?
The what with you?
The recording. Can you please share it with us via our email?
I will put it onto the YouTube channel, Komotso, if that's okay.
No, thank you very much.
I'll separate the two discussions, and it'll be on the YouTube channel. Just